Hello everybody, welcome to Raising Vibrations and your assignment today. And in today's video, we're going to be looking at the new moon in Aquarius. And this is for the 1st of February, 2021. So I hope you guys are well and that this video finds you at a place where you're either beginning to open up to healing yourself and understanding what self-empowerment means. You're in that process of going through deep metamorphosis and transformation in your life, or that you're on the other side of it and that you're beginning to very deeply tap into your creativity and begin to express that in the world. This is pretty much the message that I want to put across consistently through this channel, and any of the information that I want to share regarding how this astrology is presenting itself for us right now. My main kind of direction is to inspire this way of seeing and thinking within the context of your life. So with that being said, our roadmap today is I wanted to share a little bit about what me and Jen see in terms of this new moon. We're going to touch on the Saturn-Uranus square that I think is important to look at with this new moon. We're going to do some chart work, of course, absolutely, looking at the chart, seeing how the astrology is actually showing up in a visual way, and we'll end off with a summary today. Okay, so that's our roadmap. That's what I feel I'm going to take you through, and anything else that kind of inspires me along the way in terms of conversation. So, what is the new moon message that both myself and Jen feel that could be part of this process? And I would say that there is actually quite a few layers to this, to be honest. It depends on where you are internally within yourself and your external life situations and circumstances. And that will deeply dictate the nature of how you are actually experiencing this new moon. So you always got to take into account that each individual, each person has their own internal relationship to where they are. And hopefully the idea here is to kind of like connect with at least some part of that, because there is quite a lot of diversity when it comes to looking at this channel and what I'm sharing. So the new moon itself lands in gate 19, hexagram 19 in human design. And this is in Aquarius, of course. This is the sign of Aquarius. It's conjunct Saturn, right? The new moon is conjunct Saturn. That's why I want to bring in Uranus and Saturn into the play. And the first, I think the first thing that I want to bring to it is the idea of how resources exist within the context of our life. Okay, so resources being a very key word here. Like your ability to recognize the resources that are around you and to be able to tap into those resources to empower yourself, okay? Right? To be able to support whatever it is that you are trying to do with your life. So within our awareness, there's an instinct that pressures us to go, hey, let's look around. We need to recognize what resources need to be met within ourselves in order to survive, right? It's on a deep primal level. It's like how we're going to eat, the home, the shelter, our most intimate relationships, sleeping, etc. These are deeply entrenched within our biological structure. And every day there is a need to be able to meet those needs and understand those resources. And in the world that we see right now, there are multiple kind of scenarios where on one hand, there's a very clear sense that there is a tremendous absence of resources, right? We know this through the current sort of economic structure that is existing on the planet right now, the impact that the pandemic had on economics and how countries are trying to deal with that. And as an everyday consumer, I'm sure on some level there is a recognition, whether it just be in the peripheral, that there is a scarcity with regards to certain resources, right? And what this promotes, within the context of our message at least, right, understanding a little bit more subtle and deeper layers in terms of global cycles and stuff, these resources we always take for granted. We always see them as, there's always going to be gas for the car at the petrol station. There's always going to be food on the shelves. There's always going to be availability in places. And that's actually not the case, right? We've just been very fortunate for a very long time to have logistics in place that allows for negotiations and trades to take place between people who produce, say, milk, for instance, people that transport that milk, and people that actually then sell it at the grocery store, right? And for us, that sense of connection between our home and the grocery store is primarily that relationship that we experience. We don't necessarily think about the entire chain that exists. And due to the tremendous impact that Uranus and Saturn has had with each other over the last 2 years, and particularly 2021, right, we've become aware of our vulnerability, right, the fragility that we have within the context of availability of things being there. And on a deeper level, our attachments to these resources that we use to meet the need for our day-to-day living expenses and life, right? And of course, we have to factor in that we also have a limbic system, which is evolved to, on one level, right, this is our social capacity for being able to relate, but it also contains where our fear is held. And so, when we experience patterns changing, or when we experience things like unavailability of resources, it threatens a deep survival instinct within us. And that's where I see or sense that this energy is essentially moving towards, is that we need to, at this point in time, understand that the pattern of resources has always been a certain way, and we've become deeply sort of held by the pattern in which resources have always been established within the context of our society and the structure of our society. And as Pluto through Capricorn moves and brings us awareness of where this vulnerability exists within the structure of our society, as the core structure of society begins to rattle and shake, we also get to see the deeply entrenched patterns of how we have just like distributed our resources, how we've used resources. You're following with what I'm saying here? So essentially, right now, with Pluto moving through Capricorn, and of course with Saturn and Uranus doing what it's been doing since 2021, we are at a point within our lives where our awareness is being deeply attuned to how we need to figure out creative ways and adaptive ways to meet the current state of reality right now, and how our resources need to be redistributed. We've got Uranus and Taurus. Taurus is the archetype of resources. We've got the North Node entering Taurus right now. And so the deep message here, along with the lunar eclipse that happened last year that was in Taurus, the deep message here is that we're reordering the way in which we actually, as a society and as communities, understand resources. Right? This is our theme for us right now. So, and I encourage you to take the word resources and investigate, or like foster deeper relationship towards what is a resource. How does it defined for you? So I've talked about this in the in one of the videos recently, like within the context of your life, what is a resource, right? And really think about it, like reflect on what a resource means to you. You may have a certain creative path that you are interacting with, and part of that creative path is supported by certain resources that you can tap into, that you can use to be able to nurture, grow, cultivate, invest in creating something, right? A project, whatever that may be. So the word resources is a very broad kind of term in terms of it can speak to different things within the context of our lives. And our ability right now to understand how resources are changing, like the way that resources exist for us and what we define as a resource and what we don't anymore, this is the scope. So you want to be really getting connected with the immediacy of your environment, and you want to be understanding where your needs exist, how those needs are supported by resources that may or may not actually be present in your life anymore, and to begin to actually reorder and restructure your life so that you can, understand where you have vulnerability, South Node in Scorpio, around resources and the absence of it or the scarcity of it, and where there is actually a plethora, like an abundant space of resources, because that's the polarity to this, right? There is resources available, and if you are in a sense kind of living in attunement with an internal guidance system, like your instincts and your ability to be able to feel and sense where you as a soul is kind of growing towards, resources are consistently available. We just may have a limited definition of it, and so we don't really see beyond those definitions of a resource. You may think of resources only as a job, but a resource can be a really, really supportive friend. It can be access to the internet. It can be a website that's created by somebody who speaks about things that really resonate with you. Do you know what I mean? So broadening the term, understanding what resources are, and really getting connected with that within the context of your own life is a deeply important thing with regards to this new moon. Mainly because this new moon is initiating the sort of year and a half's work of the North Node in Taurus, but also the context of what Saturn and Uranus have actually been speaking about. So, and I think one of the things that comes along with this is you've got to see community as a resource as well, right? Who do you resonate with? I mean, right now on the world, if you kind of look out at the world, you can really see how these patterns are emerging into the collective consciousness. Because, like for instance, I'm sure many of you in some way, shape or form are aware of this movement, this freedom movement that is occurring with Canadian truckers. And you can see that, they have an agenda, they're moving in a certain direction, and people are, investing their own finances, their own resources into supporting that because they resonate with it, right? They find value in that process. They side with that. And with Mercury at the moment conjuncting Pluto, you're really getting to see lines being drawn between those that consider that to be a purposeful action and those that see it as not a distraction, but like an irritation or like a silly libertarian theme, right? There's a very strong divide that's taking place with people at the moment. We're seeming like they're drawing lines in the sand very strongly between those that we align with and those that we don't. And I think that's a really dangerous thing at the moment. As a Pluto and Libra soul, I recognize that not every single person is like, for every other person, right? There is a need for discernment within the context of who you actually resonate with and not. My concern is that during this kind of reorganization, and I'll get into the Saturn thing here, my concern is that the more polarization that exists within the world, you will understand that there's a kind of underlying sense of not seeing the humanness within this collective shared experience. I don't want to go too deeply into that process because that's not the scope of the conversation entirely, but it is very much promoted by these planets at the moment. So there is a kind of thread there, but I want to be conscious of our time. So Uranus Saturn square, okay? And since 2021, this Uranus Saturn square has been actually pretty impactful in terms of the current world that we live in right now. Okay. So throughout 2021, Saturn and Uranus made 3 squares, right? December, June, and January. And if you look back to those dates, if you go on the internet and just go and research these dates, I think December was the 24th and June was, I can't remember exactly when June was, maybe like 13th, sometime around there. I'm not 100% sure. And I know that in January, it was like the 6th, 7th, right? Maybe even a little bit. I'm not 100% sure on that date as well. My memory is a little bit absent there. But the point here is go on the internet, go and look at where these 3 Saturn Uranus squares took place, and then reflect back on what actually has changed within your life or what you were processing. Because that archetypal aspect between Saturn and Uranus has been, like I said, and I'll continue to say, deeply influential in the way that you can actually experience resources within your life or the absence of resources in your life, right now. Because there are these 2 sides. It's like a lot of people feel that they are in alignment with something that really resonate with them. They feel that they belong to something, part of a bigger community where there is an ability to tap into resources, and then there's many of people that feel a complete absence of that. Like, so I talked about with Pluto and Gate 60. Pluto is deeply transmuting the context of direction for us, and for wherever we feel limitation within our lives, we need to question if that door has closed for us and that the limitation is forcing us to look a different way. And part of that looking a different way is deeply influenced by the availability of resources. Has it all dried up? Right? How would we survive? And if you respond from deep fear, which is a probability, right? It's going to be very difficult to see a way out. And that's where the intention here with regards to this message, at least in this new moon, is that you've got to see this time as a transformational time. You really have to put your big shoes on and say, I take responsibility for the quality of my life as much as I can. There are lots of circumstances outside of our control that we cannot influence due to the magnitude of them, right? But that doesn't mean that you surrender totally to that, right? You get up every single day and you put some time and effort into figuring it out. And that's a scary thing, because it means that for a lot of us, the responsibility is on your shoulders. And we don't want to carry responsibility because we've been deeply entrenched in the idea that if somebody else can do it for us, then, whew, right? And this is where we haven't grown up yet. And that's something that's deeply a part of Pluto 3 Capricorn, is where are we still in our childhood, right? Where are we not allowing ourselves to free ourselves from that childhood helplessness? And so we reach into governmental structures, or we reach into the other person taking the responsibility, or that person should do this action so that therefore I don't have to feel bad about it, And this is very much about this empowerment phase. And there will be, and is, and will continue to be, a pattern of those that choose to empower themselves through the dynamics in the scenarios, and those that are comfortable in that state of helplessness. And Aquarius is the archetype of liberation. It's the instinct within our consciousness to free ourselves from patterns that no longer work for us. And that statement can be sort of spread across the board. It can be it can be intercepted into anything, But the essence of the archetype is to free yourself from your own internal jail cell. And that jail cell for the collective at the moment is the idea that we are helpless, or that you are helpless, or that there's no choice. And to a certain degree, yes, the world is very complex, and that's the case. But in other ways and in other places, there's a deep ability for transmutation to take place. And it's whether or not we want to pick up that baton and give ourselves permission to actually transmute, right? To change it, to want a better life in that way, and to be able to understand where resources are, and then to tap into those resources and to facilitate an internal metamorphosis, as it were. And that Saturn-Uranus square that took place in 2021, in my view, was the activator for this in a bigger way than, say, Uranus-Pluto square that took place between 2012 and 2018. So where do you have dependencies? And are those dependencies healthy? Are they healthy dependencies where those resources, there's a mutual support? Where do you have, look internally in your emotional space, look where there is unresolved trauma or unresolved patterns of disempowerment, and you want to consciously look at how that's impacting your direction in life and how you see the world. And it's probably not the funnest road to walk, initially at least, because there's the confrontation with the internal demons and dragons and stuff, and the aloneness that comes along with these types of experiences. But ultimately, at the end of the road, there is another side of this story where you have the ability to tap into resources that are deeper empowering. There is the ability to begin reaching out and connecting with communities and having your ideas flourish, right? How many of us have actually thought about that? Like, if you have an idea that you want to cultivate, nurture, or grow, Aquarius energy, do you give space for that to actually exist? Or do we sit back and feel like, I've got all these great ideas, I really want to impact the world in this way, and then there's no action, right? Because maybe I'm afraid. These are the types of things that stop people from being able to truly live something that is deeply meaningful, creative, and purposeful in your life. And these types of energies right now are literally sitting at the forefront, pushing the boundary to say, hey, it's not comfortable anymore. It's not comfortable anymore. Wake up, wake up, wake up. From the sleep, from the nap, from the soma, right? And get comfortable, get comfortable with the uncomfortable for a bit, as it creates some spark, right? Some fire underneath us to be able to transmute, right? Transmutation is the element of fire as part of the process. So nothing's going to happen if your life just stays the same as it is every day. Predictability can trust that resource. You want things to kind of stress you a bit. You want things to get you to go, I need to change this. I need adaptation. Our genetics are in a space where there is a mutation taking place, and the ego structure as part of ourselves doesn't like that. It likes consistency. It likes everything to stay the same, right? And so we never actually recognize where our personal boundaries are, where our thresholds are. We don't feel that that part of us that knows that we can tolerate things, right? We can tolerate some pain. We can tolerate some irritation. We can tolerate some stress. Like, where is that boundary? How much are you able to withstand some things in your life that are pushing you against the wall and saying, come on, show us what you got. And you just turn around one day and you're like, enough. And you begin to make choices in your life that leads you to something that improves the quality of your experience. So I'm going to shift over to the astrology charts right now and just show you where this entire message comes from the astrology perspective, okay? Hopefully this is giving you food for thought. Hopefully you are hearing what I'm saying and thinking about things in your life where you could see that maybe a shift in the way you see it could give you the inspiration, the motivation to say, this is where my feelings of lack of agency, right? The lack of agency exists. And you're like, this is where I'm going to take agency. This is where I'm going to contact that person, reach out and say, hey, I've got these skill sets, I've got these ideas, I'd really like to collaborate, as an example, right? Aquarius, like where are the resources available within the context of the community, and how can you become a resource in that community? How can you participate in the greater goods support mechanism so that not only do you feel like you're not doing it alone, and that, that there isn't other people like-minded who have the same interests as you, that will say, hey, I've always wanted to collaborate and find some, some shared resources to build something, whatever that may be. Okay, cool. So let's do some chart work. All right, so as you can see, here is the chart of this new moon. And our first focal point is the moon conjunct the sun and Saturn in Aquarius. So throughout the initial part of this video, a great deal of the inspiration, my thinking, my thought process is coming from this location in the chart: Saturn, Sun, Moon conjunction, right? Saturn is the archetype that says to us, if you're going to come into this world and you want to individuate yourself, right? You want to bring your own unique ideas to the table. You want to be able to stand strong in navigating this world. You have to do some karmic work, right? And part of that karmic work is stepping out of the emotional landscape that is still part of our childhood, right? So where you're learning to become internally secure within yourself, okay? Where you're learning to recognize that you can lead your life, right? You can understand that when you make your choices in your life, this is you're making it, and you're leading with that place. And you're becoming less and less attached to the idea that somebody else can do that for you, right? You're assuming responsibility for the things that you want to change within your life, and then you lead with that. And that's a journey, right, throughout your life. But that's where the deepest amount of growth that comes from. So Saturn in Aquarius speaks to the potential for people to deeply free themselves from the structures within themselves internally, where there is still a dependency, right, on the parent, or a dependency on the government, or the dependency on another person solving the problem for you. And with the square to Uranus in Taurus, it's a lesson in being able to connect with and understand how resources exist within our world. I talked about that earlier around, how do resources support the intention that we may have for our lives, right? And how are we able to sense what resources are meaningful and not, right? What is a resource? So I covered that right in the beginning of the conversation. So within the context of this aspect here, this Saturn that's sitting there in Uranus, internally and individually for us, this is very much about our ability to free ourselves from the limitations of our own thinking, the limitations of our own emotional dependencies, and to be able to cross a threshold, to cross a boundary, and to say, here's what I'm capable of carrying right now. Here's what I'm capable of holding within my life right now, and maturing, essentially, right? And you can know when you are still within the bounds of Saturn's clutches, as it were, is that we tend to look outside of ourselves for other people's actions to meet our internal need for safety, security, or idealism. Yeah. And when we do that, we create control dynamics. Right? And then what comes out of that process, what comes out of that control dynamic is grief, because the grief of being abandoned by another person's inability to meet our internal need leads us to creating an outer critic. And then that's where judgment comes from. That's where persecution comes from. And that's what's very rife in the world right now. Like when we other people, we other them from a place within our own internal unresolved grief, primarily. And so this Uranus Saturn has really given the potential for people to free themselves from these internal shackles where we need other people to dance a certain way in order for us to feel safe within the context of our own life. Now, with the sun and the moon conjuncting this in Aquarius, it brings it to the surface and it says, Where do you still hold these patterns? What's holding you back, right? Where is there still internal feelings of fear or unconscious need for external savior? So this aspect really speaks to a deep metamorphosis within the context of that. But if you think about astrology in terms of cycles, we've just had a Venus retrograde, okay? And you can see here that Venus and Mars are sitting in Capricorn at the moment, and they are going to be moving across to Pluto over there. Okay, so we can already sense that there's an internal-external relationship pattern, Mars-Venus, that will be approaching Pluto, elimination. And are you going to finally begin to shift your sense of power dynamic from the external to the internal? Or at least set that in motion, okay? Depending on your capacity to interact with that and do that will dictate your ability to feel safe in the outside world of multiple variables and inconsistency and complexity and chaos. Because it is. From a 7-year-old's perspective, from a 3-year-old's perspective, the world may be wonderful in terms of exploration, but on another level, it's full of scary monsters and unpredictable patterns and unknowns. And that's why a parent comes in and says, here's the boundary for safety. But as we grow, we need to be able to push that boundary and say, we no longer fear that because we understand it. We sense it. And where we don't have that sense, we put a boundary in place. That's what it does to protect us. So this pattern at the moment holds the potential for us to individually free ourselves from where these boundaries have been put in place in order to protect us from something we couldn't understand, make sense of, and to free ourselves from certain beliefs that we still hold that are rooted in the past. Like many people are deeply self-critical about their inability to actualize themselves because they fear whatever. And have you considered reshaping the landscape and looking at that part of you and saying, you know what, I forgive myself for the choices I made when I was in survival mode. I understand that right now, the way in which I gave permission for me to get motivated was through this inner critic that says, you must do this. That's not inspiring at all. When you want to do something and what motivates you is this corporal person that's kind of whipping you at the back saying you should do this, otherwise you're going to be bad. You want to free yourself from these things. So this energy really speaks to the ability to look at where we still carry messages, beliefs, patterns within ourselves that hold people back, hold you back. Okay. And with Mars, Venus finishing its retrograde, we're now at a new place internally regarding our sense of relationship to ourselves. There's certain value structures that you're now prepared to hold, right? It's very clear. That's what I talked about earlier in terms of people drawing the line in the sand. That line is being drawn because people are becoming deeply connected to and real with what resonates with them and what doesn't. You know, so that's what's going to trigger this whole South Node and Scorpio thing as well, where you're going to see a lot of feelings of betrayal and abandonment and loss as people choose to separate. You can think of the other thing that's occurring in the collective consciousness at the moment, or how this astrology is revealing itself, is through maybe you know about this or not, but the whole Joe Rogan, Spotify, Neil Young thing, right? There's if you deeply analyze that dynamic, you know, that pattern exists there of betrayal and loss and abandonment and standing up for certain positions, etc. So as it looks right now, like I said, these two planets, if I just click on this over here for us, let's do it. There's Mars and Venus. There we go. We make this a bit bigger, as you can see. Right? Venus trining Uranus. So that's that freedom dynamic to free ourselves, the impulse to free, but it's squaring Chiron. And what that means is that once you free yourself from the patterns that held you in safety, it's very uncomfortable initially because it's like, whoa, hold on. Now I realize how much of that pattern was holding me in sense of safety. But are you going to choose to stay in the pattern of safety, or are you going to choose to grow and step out of that safety? Right? That's the question. Are you going to take a leap of faith? Are you going to challenge yourself? Are you going to see where your boundaries really are? Are you going to grow? Right? These are all potentials. So let's think about, so that's Venus, right? I know that Mars and Venus are in a conjunction at the moment. In EA, this relationship between Mars and Venus is what's called a new phase. So this is a very much an instinctual pattern that we are experiencing right now. Remember, I talked about this as cardinal energy in the previous new or full moon. It's cardinal energy shifting into something completely new, right? Reliving a new pattern of reality. So right now, these energies are pushing that message for transformation, pushing these messages for metamorphosis. It's held over there. Mercury just about to go direct, and Mercury will bring through messages of empowerment. But Mercury also conjunct Pluto eliminates any definitions, any thinking patterns that are no longer relevant to the future. So that's where I'm going to leave this chart today. So welcome back, guys. As always, I really hope that you found some value in what I've been sharing with you today, and that it's given you some food for thought. You've allowed yourself to reflect on some of the things that I've been sharing, and that it's created some inspiration to tap into something within yourself, like to reach deep down into the planes of your own internal system, and to pull something out of that place that not only honors the deep creativity and the potential for deep creativity that is held within you and your genetics, but the ability to participate in this collective shared experience where you see yourself as a resource for somebody else that hasn't discovered you yet, and the other way around. And that in a world that is consistently framing things in such dire negative ways, that your agency is not swallowed in by, or swallowed up by, the drowning of negativity, but the capacity to change something. So that's my thoughts today. Like I said, I really hope that this got some value. As always, if you've got something to say, you want to share something, give your comments on your experience, write down in the comments below, tell me what you think, put your thoughts and ideas there. And if you do that, be mindful of the ability to share your ideas in ways that create collaboration, right? Okay, like if you like this video, if you thought it was valuable to you and you think it's going to be valuable to somebody else, please share the video to people. Let YouTube know that this is something that has meaning and value, from your point of view. If you haven't subscribed to Raising Vibrations, I encourage you to do that. And to anybody that you share this video with, tell them to subscribe so that, of course, YouTube again can notify you when these videos come out. And yeah, thanks very much for listening, peeps. Have an amazing day, and until the next video, take care. Bye-bye.